Hi, this is the voice, Michael Chavello. You're listening to the Premium Oddscast, hosted by leading MMA odds maker Nick Kalikas, fight scientist and author of Fightnomics Reed Kuhn, and MMA journalist Brian Heminger. The absolute best UFC betting info, picks, statistics, and analysis from the most respected authority in mixed martial arts betting, MMAoddsbreaker.com.
Welcome to the Premium Oddscast, presented by Five Dimes and hosted on MMAoddsbreaker.com. I'm Brian Heminger, joined today by leading mixed martial arts odds maker Nick Kalikas to break down this Sunday's UFC Fight Night 59 event, which takes place in Boston, Massachusetts. Now, our podcast is dedicated to the best betting advice as well as fantasy MMA advice for all you Countermove and DraftKings users out there. Now, if you're unfamiliar with our format, myself and Nick will be breaking down the fight card from top to bottom, providing extensive analysis and a pick for each fight after doing our film study for the event. Then, fight scientist Reed Kuhn will step in and offer his expansive numerical insight on all bouts with sufficient data. Today, Reed will be able to contribute on 4 total bouts. Now, also pay special attention to our MMA Oddsbreaker staff picks article in case we make any last-minute changes following the weigh-ins or any other news that came out this week. Briefly looking back at our last event, our premium package bets for UFC 182 went 2-1 to win 3.2 units overall. We won our bet on Jon Jones, as well as a 2-unit underdog bet on Cody Garbrandt, while our 3-unit underdog play on Miles Jury failed to cash. Now, we also won a big 2-unit underdog play on Paul Felder for our free bet. Back to the present, UFC Fight Night 59 features a 12-fight card in total and will be aired on UFC Fight Pass and Fox Sports 1 this Sunday night. Let's dive right in. Now, kicking off the preliminary card is a flyweight contest between Tateki Matsuda, who is 10-6, taking on Joby Sanchez, who is 6-1. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Sanchez minus 150, the comeback on Matsuda plus 110, and right now over at 5dimes.eu. By the way, all the lines that I am quoting are courtesy of 5dimes.eu. Sanchez is now minus 160, the comeback on Matsuda's plus 140, so slightly a little bit more action coming in towards Sanchez. It's a tough fight. Honestly, in my opinion, it's a toss-up fight that could realistically go either way. Matsuda's been flying under the radar for a long time. I mean, he's been at a strong camp. He's been in the game for a long time, and he's been a very successful and solid fighter overall. You could say kind of the similar things. I mean, as far as being from a good camp with Sanchez, he's from a very strong camp as well, Jackson. So, and he looked pretty impressive despite losing his UFC debut to Hayes. So this is a fight at 125, which is going to have a lot of potential impact in the division, is what I'm trying to spit out here. Matsuda is dropping down to 125, making his debut at the weight class here in the UFC. I think it's going to be a good move for him. I think he could be very competitive at 125, and the division needs to get a little bit deeper, so I'm glad to see him make the move. Sanchez, on the other hand, again, I mean, he was in a very competitive, he had his moments against Hayes, and Hayes is right in the mix of things at 125 as well. So even though he's a little bit more new, he's younger, he's only 6-1 overall in his career, a little bit fresher, a little bit raw, he's still a very good addition to the 125 weight class as well. So how I see this fight playing out, I think it's going to be a kind of a coin flip type of matchup here. I think Matsuda, he's got a little bit of the experience edge coming into this fight over Sanchez, and I think that's probably going to bode well for him. Now, fight IQ sometimes isn't the best for Matsuda. In his last fight, I think, Matsuda actually performed relatively well against Beal. A lot of people weren't expecting him to do as well. And it was a fight he could have actually won. He just, he had those moments where he ended up getting placed on his back. He was going for the takedowns and ended up, on the bottom instead. And it kind of cost him the fight. So those are some things that I would like Matsuda to correct in his game, but overall, I mean, he's a pretty talented striker. He's a well-rounded fighter overall. He's got decent wrestling, in most cases as well. He's not a stranger to BJJ. He's got good submission defense. So Matsuda's a very talented, well-rounded fighter with that experience edge. Now, Sanchez, on the other hand, he's more well-known for his striking ability. He's fun to watch, especially with his kicking arsenal. I mean, the guy, like I said, almost caught Hayes, in his UFC debut with a kick, actually, too. So he's got that potential. He had also, I should mention that Sanchez has, a win over, former UFC WEC vet, Ben Wellis as well. So that was an impressive, TKO victory for him before he made his UFC debut. So he's got some potential. not sure that he's overall as sound right now as Matsuda is. And I think Matsuda coming down to this weight class of 125, I think he could do enough to probably steal the decision here. But again, it's going to be an ultra coin flip type of fight. Sanchez is going to look to try to basically control the tempo of the fight on the feet. And I think Matsuda is going to hang in there and do well. I think actually the striking, I wouldn't be surprised if Matsuda actually gets a better Sanchez overall on the feet. So that'll be interesting there as well. I know if the fight goes to the ground, it's probably going to be Matsuda looking for the takedown attempts here in this spot. Sanchez's takedown defense overall against Hayes, it was okay. It was respectable, at least, for Hayes being such a good, talented grappler. But I definitely expect better takedown defense and a better performance for Sanchez in this fight as well. So a coin flip type of fight. There could very well be some value on Matsuda though, because as a coin flip and you're getting around plus 140 or so, I think it's a dog or pass situation, and Matsuda's probably flying underneath the radar a little bit. So my official pick is actually going to be on the dog. I think Matsuda is going to hang in there and do well in this matchup at 125 for him. So close fight, looking forward to it. A great way to start off the night on UFC Fight Pass. But my official pick is going to be Matsuda.
And I'm in agreement. The main thing here is I think the well-roundedness of Matsuda is going to play a big part, mainly because Sanchez is a bit one-dimensional. He likes to strike. He has pretty good kicks overall. And that's his biggest strength. His kicking game is hands down his best attribute. And I don't think it's going to be as big of a factor here against Matsuda, because Matsuda can catch kicks, he can take him down. Matsuda's offensive striking is very good. He pushes a high pace, high volume, he has good cardio, and his leg kicks are phenomenal. I mean, he was torching Chris Beal on the feet with leg kicks, and if he just kept doing that, he could have won that fight easily, actually. The second round was all his until he started going in for takedowns, and the same thing in the third round. Just fight IQ is my biggest concern here with Matsuda, because he had no reason to go for takedowns against Beal. He was winning on the feet, and every time he did, he was getting reversed. So, his takedowns are there, but maybe his grappling and transitions on the ground and scrambling ability isn't quite to that top level. So that is a bit of a concern. So I am a little bit cautious picking Matsuda just because maybe he, makes another mental error. But again, he should win this fight because Sanchez's biggest strength is the feet, and I think Matsuda can not only hold his own with him there, but he might even be able to beat him on the feet. And then if you factor in the other facets of Matsuda's game, and the fact that he's fighting in his backyard, I mean, he's from Japan, but he's been training out of Massachusetts with Mark Delagrati and Team Sidyangtong for pretty much his whole MMA career. So he's going to be very comfortable, sleeping in his own bed and all that stuff. So I'm favoring Matsuda to pull this out. So he is my pick. Now, moving up to the light heavyweight division, we have Matt Van Buren, who is 7-3, taking on Sean O'Connell, who's 15-6. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
Well, Evan O'Connell minus 140 to come back on Van Buren, even money, and action has come in for O'Connell. He is now minus 175 to come back on Van Buren is plus 155. Not that surprised. I mean, based on Van Buren's last performance in his official UFC debut. What a shame, man. Van Buren's defense is just non-existent. I mean, he's the type of guy that likes to block punches with his face, and that necessarily doesn't bode well for him. I mean, he's been knocked out a couple times in his career, and he's going to continue to get knocked out if he doesn't address those defensive issues for sure. He is obviously a bit chinny because of that. And it is a shame overall because Van Buren, I think, is a very talented fighter offensively, at least. I mean, he could KO you. He's got enough subs in his offensive arsenal as well to make things interesting. And then, I mean, he's a decent grinder in his own right. So I think on the feet offensively, he could do some damage. I think, again, overall, as a complete fighter and skill set, he has some potential there. It's just unfortunate for him that, I mean, his defense lets him down, his chin lets him down, and fight IQ obviously has to go along with that as well. He trains at a good camp, out of Alliance MMA. So he's got some good things going for him, but, another bad matchup here, I think, for him and O'Connell. O'Connell is a very underrated, I think, veteran of the sport. He's been around for a while. And it's good to see him actually, get some respect with making his UFC debut not long ago and actually, being competitive in that Vellante fight. A lot of people were counting him out in that aspect as well. I know he got knocked out in his UFC debut against Ryan Jimmo, but he bounced back, and even though he lost that split decision, it was controversial to the hands of Vellante. So a lot of people, I think his stock went up despite that loss, and I'm glad to see it because O'Connell does probably deserve to get some of that respect. Now, he's a very complete fighter overall. O'Connell is a very aggressive fighter. He's got underrated knockout power on the feet. And of course, he's got some decent clinch work, some decent wrestling to go along with it. He's kind of a grinder type of fighter that doesn't really excel in that area, but he is very solid. And again, the power and the way he pushes the pace, combined with Van Buren's strike defense is probably not that good for Van Buren. So it's hard to trust either one of these guys because O'Connell has some defensive flaws of his own, right? He's been knocked out 3 times overall. So realistically, if Van Buren decides to play a little bit of defense in this fight and, and start unloading some punches, you could see him knock O'Connell out. But on the other hand, more times than not, I think O'Connell probably does reverse things and end up maybe KOing Van Buren in this spot. So it's just hard to trust. Honestly, either one of these guys, I'm not a big fan of laying 175 or even 150 on O'Connell, but at the same time, I don't think it's a dog or pass situation. I think it's kind of a pass situation here. So my official pick, based on more than anything else, Van Buren's defensive issues, is going to be O'Connell. I think O'Connell gets his much needed UFC W here, and that's going to be, unfortunately, a bad thing for Van Buren. So my official pick is going to be O'Connell.
I definitely agree that you can't trust either of these guys. The big question here is the chin strength. Neither guy has a very good chin, although O'Connell does have a propensity to get in brawls, which is something that isn't the best considering his chin. But man, Van Buren's chin is just terrible. In 2 of his last 3 professional bouts, not counting the Ultimate Fighter, he's been knocked out in a minute or less, and that's just not, and it wasn't even against guys that are, super heavy hitters. One was against a wrestler, one was in Bellator. So it's very scary that he's going in there against UFC caliber light heavyweights with some of the worst striking defense in UFC history. And even though Sean O'Connell isn't a world beater, the guy's 0-2 in the UFC, but you could argue that he won that last fight against Gian Vellante. But even though he isn't a world beater, he's probably good enough to crack Van Buren's chin. Van Buren just does not protect himself at all. He doesn't use good head movement. He just kind of comes in, looks to land big shots, and he has good offensive firepower. It's the defense. And he's so prone to counters and so prone to just big looping overhand shots that it just isn't worth it. And in this fight against O'Connell, if O'Connell connects with something good, Van Buren's going to be in big trouble. Van Buren, he's long, he's tall, but that just kind of makes him a big, easy target for that overhand right or overhand left. And O'Connell does a really good job in fights of moving forward, pressuring his opponents, making them back into the fence, and then he can, do some work in the clinch. O'Connell's a pretty solid overall fighter. I was actually pretty impressed with some of his well-rounded attributes watching him in his UFC career so far, even though he did end up losing both of those fights. He's not the most technical striker, but he's effective enough, and you don't really have to be a technical striker to hit Van Buren, unfortunately. So I'm going to go with Sean O'Connell. I think he gets that first UFC win. Now, kicking off the Fox Sports 1 prelims, we have a featherweight contest between Charles Rosa, who is 9-1, taking on Sean Soriano, who's 8-2 overall. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I've been Rosa -175, the comeback on Soriano +135, and right now looking over at 5 times, it's -140 for Rosa, the comeback on Soriano +120. So a little bit more action coming in on the dog. Yeah, man, this is another tough one, honestly. For most of you guys that have been listening to the Premium Oddscast, you know that we've been pretty supportive of Soriano and his skill set overall. I think that Soriano is one of these guys that, sky's the limit for him really, but he hasn't addressed a big issue, and that's definitely his cardio. Even against Skelly in his last fight, he managed to go 3 rounds, but in round 2 and round 3, I think, he kind of gave up some of those takedowns because he was so exhausted. Now, obviously, Skelly was worse for the wear because, Soriano put it on him, and I think Soriano could have won that fight, but it just didn't play out that way for him, and you got to give Skelly a lot of credit. But he has that kind of potential. I think even against Kawajiri, you look back at his fight against Kawajiri early on, Soriano looked great in that fight. So what you get with Soriano is actually, I mean, a very well-trained fighter. He's from the Blackzilian camp, so he's got that going for him as well. Has a decent training environment. And on the feet, he's got a ton of power, and he's very skilled. I mean, he definitely has a technical edge over most fighters, and he's got power to back it up. So Soriano is improving his overall game. He's got decent takedown defense in most cases. From the top, I mean, the guy has nasty ground and pound if he gets on top of you. So he's got a lot of ways to win fights. But the problem is, again, goes back to his cardio. He does wear down, and his cardio just doesn't last for him, and that's causing him, I think, to lose fights here. So that doesn't sit very well for me. And Rosa, on the other hand, he has better cardio. He made his UFC debut, obviously against Dennis Siver, which was pretty impressive because he hung in there really well against Siver. Unfortunately for him, he took the fight on short notice. Siver got the best of him there, won by decision, but Rosa definitely showed off some skill in that fight. I mean, Rosa's a very complete fighter. Again, he's got decent cardio, trains at a good camp with American Top Team as well. On the feet, Rosa's pretty fun to watch. He loves to throw kicks and get a little bit wild and aggressive at times, which is pretty neat. On his back is actually one of the most I think the most capable areas for Rosa. You don't really want to be on your back as a fighter, but he definitely looks for submission and is very aggressive in the submission game, whether he's on top or from his back. But it's also highly impressive to see a fighter scramble like that and kind of go for the sub attempts like Rosa does if he is put in that position. So Rosa is a very complete, talented fighter. I think the pure striking edge in this fight, how they match up, Soriano has it, but that being said, Soriano slows down enough that Rosa could make things interesting on the feet. Rosa's probably going to look to take this fight to the ground. I think he's going to struggle along the way because Soriano has faced recently better wrestlers, pure wrestlers, than Rosa in this fight. I do ultimately think that Rosa will do enough to win 2 out of 3 rounds at least against Soriano, so I got to side with him in this spot.
And I'm in agreement. The main thing here is it's just tough to trust Sean Soriano. The guy has a lot of talent. He's got a lot of power. He trains with great people over at the Blackzilians, but he just hasn't been able to put it together in the UFC. Granted, they've thrown him in there against some good wrestlers. Kawajiri took him down and submitted him, and then Chaz Skelly just took him down and, beat up on him and held him down over the course of 3 rounds for the most part. So going in there against a guy like Charles Rosa, this fight could get interesting if it stays standing. I'm not 100% convinced it will, though, because Rosa does have, he doesn't have the incredible wrestling or that super power double leg type takedown, but he has good trips. He has decent timing with his takedowns. And when he gets you to the canvas, you can be in big trouble. The guy has an incredibly diverse and dangerous submission arsenal that he just really likes to employ the second the fight hits the canvas. He's very dangerous on the ground. On the feet, Rosa is pretty good at distance. He's not much of a striker yet. It's still definitely part of his game he's working on. But his kicking game is coming a long way. He likes to stand at that sideways karate stance and whip out a lot of head kicks and side kicks and leg kicks. So he's dangerous at distance, although not very powerful and not very sneaky. Everything's kind of telegraphed. But up close, that's where Soriano shines. He's good in the pocket. He has good power. And in the clinch area, he has very good knees that he likes to punish opponents that have failed takedown attempts against him. And he has really good elbows. So he does a lot of things really good when the fight's up close and personal. He's like a little buzzsaw on the inside. The big problem for Soriano is, as Nick mentioned, the conditioning. He definitely slows down as the fight goes on. And as he slows down, his takedown defense gets worse. So maybe if Rosa won't have success in that first frame trying to get Soriano down, but if he's persistent with it, he's going to get Soriano down eventually. Rosa trains out of a great gym as well, American Top Team. They have a big rivalry with the Blackzilians, and I think that Rosa's overall game right now, he's just more well-rounded. He has better conditioning, and if this fight goes to the ground, Soriano's going to be in some big trouble. The guy just gives up his back too much in transition, and Rosa will absolutely take advantage of that. He's a very opportunistic grappler, and I can see Sean Soriano getting himself in a lot of trouble on the canvas for this fight. So I'm going to pick Charles Rosa to pull out the win. Now moving up to the lightweight division, we have Johnny Case, who's 19-4, taking on Frankie Perez, who is 9-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I opened Case minus 160, the comeback on Perez plus 120, and right now over at Dimes, it's minus 175 for Case, Perez is plus 155. So a little bit more support coming in on Case. Another spot I can understand. I mean, Case looked extremely well. He looked good in his UFC debut for sure, and he's had some hype around him for quite a long time as well. So he's been on the UFC's radar. He's been on a lot of the diehard fans' radar for a long time, and I'm glad to finally see him, enter in the UFC and make his debut and be a successful one against Tokudumi. So that was pretty impressive overall. And Case is a very talented fighter. I mean, he's the type of guy, he's a finisher. The guy has really fun and excellent stand-up to watch. I mean, he mixes everything up well with his kickboxing. He's got good clinch work. He's got power to go along with it. He's got decent fight IQ. He's got decent accuracy to go along with it. But the thing is, he is a very complete fighter because he can submit you as well. I mean, you make a mistake on the ground, Case will hop on something and end your night that way by submission as well. So he has a lot of different ways he can win the fight, and he's only improving, I think, as, his career keeps on moving forward. So you got to love what you see in Case. I think he's a talented prospect. He does have to address some issues though, and one of them is his takedown defense. That seems to be his kryptonite, and Perez is the type of fighter is actually going to come in here. You got your typical grappler versus striker matchup. In Case is the striker obviously overall, but Perez is that grappler, and that seems to be in the past, some of Case's difficulties have come from very good grapplers that can put him on a back, control the fight, and look to sub him. So Perez is that kind of guy. He's a gritty, grinding fighter, that's gonna look to take this fight to the floor. If you look, he had a very competitive, decision loss to Wade, which isn't that bad in his career. He's been fighting again on smaller shows for the most part, but Perez is one of these guys that, continues to improve his overall game, and out of the smaller organizations that he's competed on, they're definitely respectable, and I think he's improving his overall skill set and keeps on doing the right things. Of course, his sub game is the best attribute. Now on the feet, Perez is getting better, but he's still a little raw, and he needs to improve in that area. So he doesn't want to stand there and bang with Case, even though Perez has a little bit of power. He needs to look to work Case up against the cage, look for takedowns, kind of trip on the ground and look and try to get that submission win, or if not, just kind of grind him out and maintain top control and see what he could do from there. And it's very possible. I mean, he could do a lot of those things that I'm stating right now as well. He has taken this fight on somewhat of a short notice, so that doesn't sit well for me with Perez coming into this fight, because if you watch some of his past fights, Perez's cardio is okay, but he does tend to slow down as, the fight wears on you. So I think that Perez here, he has to be a little bit cautious with his cardio, and that can come back to haunt him in round 2 and round 3 against a guy like Case. So it's tough, because I do think it's maybe a dog or pass situation here with Perez, because he's probably flying under the radar and a little bit better than everybody thinks. But again, it's hard to not pick a guy like Case that continues to show improvement and continues to evolve his overall game and continues to improve that, obviously, that takedown defense too. So I'm going to pick Case because I think he can probably maintain it up on the feet for the most part. And if he does, he's definitely the more talented fighter striking. So I'm going to give the slight edge to Case in this fight. But Perez, I think, is going to hang in there, do relatively well. And maybe in his next fight in the UFC, I think we could see a better performance from him. But in this case right here, I'm going to, no pun intended, I'm going to pick Case to get the W.
And I agree. Johnny Case is just the better overall fighter. Frankie Perez has a lot of good things going for him. He comes out of a good gym. He has a really good, solid grappling base. But his wrestling isn't that impressive. And that is Johnny Case's big weaknesses against a really good, powerful, offensive wrestler type. And that's something that Case has been actually putting a lot of time in his game to fix. And you saw that in his UFC debut where, he just blasted Tokudome and landed some really good strikes and ended up hurting his opponent before actually following to the canvas and getting the submission. So his infighting is very good. Johnny Case is a significantly better striker than Frankie Perez heading into this fight. Perez on the feet, he's got some elementary skills, but he's been working to make his game more well-rounded. On the feet, he throws a little bit of kicks from the outside, and he likes to get inside and wing overhand strikes to close the distance, to try to get inside and work for takedowns. And it's been pretty effective. I don't know how effective it'll be against Case. It depends on Case's footwork and if he allows Perez to close the distance. And overall, Perez really doesn't have that power takedown game, but he does like to get inside the clinch and work trips, body locks, a lot of stuff, which maybe is something that Case isn't very effective at dealing with yet. We really haven't seen a lot of his game against those type of takedowns. Now, if Perez is able to drag this fight to the ground, he could be in good shape. His top positional control is solid. He has some good submission ability. He has good ground and pound. He has good hips. He wins scrambles. So Case could be in a bit of trouble if he gets repeatedly put down on his back. Now, if this fight stays standing, it's absolutely Johnny Case's fight to lose. He is a dynamic striker, has some great kicks, great punching power, good technical boxing. He does a lot of really solid work in there. He trains out of Team Alliance, working alongside some really good fighters. So overall, I just think the short notice for Perez and just the fact that Johnny Case has already 1-0 in the UFC and is clearly gotten a lot better from when he was in RFA. I gotta pick Johnny Case to win this one, so he is my pick. Now dropping down to the flyweight division, we have Patrick Holohan, who is 10-1-1, taking on Shane Howell, who is 13-8. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Up in Holohan, minus 285, the comeback on Howell, plus 205, and right now, looking over at dimes, it's Holohan minus 265, plus 225 on Howell. So line just got a little bit tighter. Some decent two-way action coming in. This is a tough fight because Holohan actually showed a lot of what people didn't realize, I think, in his last fight, and that's his cardio is definitely at issue, and his defense, his strike defense, is bad as well. So it's unfortunate because Holohan, I think, offensively, I mean, he could do some damage. He's got decent clinch work on the feet. He doesn't have the greatest striking for sure. Doesn't have, like, he's not a fierce knockout puncher by any means, but he could do some damage on the feet offensively. But he definitely needs to continue to address and work on his stand-up game overall. Now, the thing that bothers me again is that cardio and his strike defense. I mean, he gets tagged way too much, eats too many punches, and then as the fight progresses, if you can hang in there, he does tend to fade, and he didn't look that great. That's why he ended up losing the unanimous decision to Kalidas in the last fight. Now, Howell, on the other hand, is one of these fighters that's obviously, he's going to bring it, man. I mean, he's, again, flying under the radar. If you look at his resume or his record, he's 13-8, so a lot of people are probably going to count him out. He's got a ton of heart. He has enough aggression that he can definitely make things interesting. If he doesn't get finished, I think, early on in this fight against Holohan, I think that, I'm not expecting him to pull this victory off, but at the same time, I think he can make it interesting enough in rounds 2 and round 3 to make a case for winning the fight. And so Holohan, I think he has to show up here in better shape, and he has to kind of take this fight serious. This is a fight for him to win or lose, though, honestly. And I think more times than not, Holohan's going to probably get in an ideal position and probably finish the fight. I mean, he is definitely slick. The best part and the best attribute of Holohan's game is his submission game. And he finds a way, once on the ground, to get in the proper position that he needs to finish fights. So that's why he's got, I believe it's 8 submission wins on his resume, and I think he's probably going to add the 9th here. Again, I think Howell's going to be game. He's going to come to fight, and I think he's going to do his best to pull off the upset here. But unfortunately for him, I think his sub defense is going to let him down yet again. That seemed to be one of his problems. He's been caught, throughout his career by submission as well. And he's facing a fighter that basically is going to look to do only that. So it's hard to pick against Holohan. That's going to be my official pick.
And I'm in complete agreement here. Holohan is just overall much better than Shane Howell. Howell, in my opinion, isn't a UFC caliber fighter whatsoever. He is in the UFC right now because he accepted a fight on short notice against Ray Borg, and he got absolutely crushed. And we saw what happened in that fight, and I think what's going to happen from that fight is going to be what happens here. Holohan should be able to outwork Howell on the feet, and if this fight, and when this fight goes to the ground, I expect Holohan to wrap him up into submission. He's very long, very lanky, very difficult to deal with on the ground, and on the feet, same thing. He has some decent punching power, despite his, long, lanky frame, and some awkward kicks. He's just very difficult to deal with. The biggest problem for him, obviously, as we saw in the last fight, is his conditioning. If he can't put you away quickly, then he can run out of steam, and then he just becomes a punching bag. It was really, really awkward and strange watching that last fight where he started strong and just completely fell apart. That could happen again here. If he doesn't put away Howell quickly, he could run into similar issues. So it'll be interesting. It makes it a little scary to risk betting money on this guy as a decent favorite too, because even though Shane Howell is not a good fighter, he at least has some decent conditioning, and if Holohan falls apart again, Howell could take advantage. So I'm picking Holohan cautiously because I can't trust that gas tank right now. I need to see a little bit more to see if he's learned to deal with those issues. So I'm picking Holohan though. Now moving up to the lightweight division, we have Zhang Lipeng, who is 9-7-1, taking on Chris Wade, who is 8-1. Now Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
I opened Wade minus 380 to come back on Lipeng, plus 260, and right now looking over at the line of dimes, it is minus 450 for Wade. Lipeng is plus 360, so a little bit more support coming in Wade's way. Not really that surprised. I mean, Wade's a very talented fighter. I'm glad to see him get the respect he deserves, and I think he's going to make some waves at 155 for sure. Now, on the other hand, Lipeng, you know what? You got to give him credit where credit's due as well. I mean, he's one of these guys that are coming from China that typically don't get a ton of respect, but you could tell that the guy's putting in the work to improve his overall game. He's getting better. He's getting more confidence. And that could really pose some problems for people. I mean, look at, in his O'Reilly fight. I mean, that was a pretty solid, impressive victory. I know O'Reilly again isn't a very high level fighter, but at the same time, it's an improvement from Lipeng, and you'd like to see him make those kind of strides. Now, against Wade, though, on the other hand, it's a bad matchup because I believe Wade is a little bit better in all areas. I mean, Wade is more well known for his grappling. He had a very nice submission in his debut win in the UFC as well, and that's the kind of fighter that Wade is. I mean, he gets the fight to the floor. He's got solid wrestling, and once he gets it to the floor, you could be in some serious trouble. If not, I mean, he grinds people out. He has decent ground and pound. He controls the tempo of the fight. But even on the feet, Wade isn't out of his element. I mean, he's more than capable of landing some power. He's got some technical skill there as well. So Lipeng is really in for a challenge here because regardless where the fight takes place, I think Wade's going to edge him out. He's going to be a little bit better. I think the best possible scenario for Lipeng is to try to hang in there and make things close enough, stay off his back, and strike with Wade a little bit, make things interesting enough that it could be a close, probably bad, controversial type of decision if he does pull off the victory here against Wade. That's what he's going to need to do. So, unfortunately for him, I don't think that's going to be the case. I think more than likely Wade does get the fight to the ground, and if he does get the fight to the floor, Wade probably finishes it by submission, and continues his UFC climb, in the 155 weight class. So, I think there's a lot of potential in Wade. He's still young enough, and he's still going to continue to improve. As a fighter, you could say the same thing about Lipeng as well. I think he's 24 years old, so he's got a long way to go, and I'm sure he'll continue to improve and be relevant at 155 if he can hang in there and just continue to move up that ladder. But unfortunately for him, I think Wade is just too much of a challenge, and regardless of where this fight takes place, Wade's going to be too much for him. So my official pick is going to be Wade.
And I'm in complete agreement. I just really don't see a lot of ways that Lipeng can win this fight. Wade came out and looked incredible in his UFC debut against Carrizosa. We expected him to win, but the way that he went out and won so convincingly, so quickly, against a pretty talented fighter, that was really, really impressive. And Lipeng, he just really hasn't done anything to impress me overall. Yeah, he's 2-0 in the UFC, but one was a split decision, and the other, he was able to out-grapple and outwork a subpar, undersized UFC fighter. Now, this fight is taking place at lightweight. Lipeng has spent most of his career at welterweight, so that should give him a slight edge dropping down a weight class, but man, Wade is going to be about the same size as him anyway, and I think he's going to be much more physical. Wade has a significantly better wrestling game, a significantly better submission game. I don't expect Lipeng to be able to do much in this fight. On the feet, Wade isn't a world beater, so maybe Lipeng can get a little something going in terms of a stand-up. But, even on the feet, Lipeng doesn't land a lot of significant strikes. His accuracy isn't really there. His defense is okay, but Wade is probably just not going to keep it standing for long anyway. He wants to get this fight to the canvas. He's going to win scrambles. He's such a good wrestler that I just think this is going to be a rough night for Lipeng. It looks like UFC is kind of giving up hope on, the next great Chinese fighter. The fact that they're feeding Lipeng to somebody as good as Wade. So, I'm actually a little surprised by that. I thought that they would let Lipeng develop a little bit more against some lower tier UFC lightweights. But Chris Wade is, pretty nasty. So, I expect Wade to not only win, but win convincingly, potentially in the first round. So my pick is Chris Wade. Now moving up to the welterweight division, we have John Doomsday Howard, who is 22-10, taking on Lorenz Larkin, who is 14-4 with 1 no contest. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
Well, I opened Howard -125, the comeback on Larkin -115, so virtually a pick'em fight with the very tiniest lean towards Howard, and the line has since flipped. Right now it's Larkin -150, the comeback on Howard is +130. Larkin dropping down to welterweight in this spot, that's what makes things interesting a little bit, I think. I mean, in my opinion, he's got so much talent. The guy had a ton of potential. I mean, he was fighting up at 205, as most of us know. And he was he was doing pretty well, having some decent success. Dropping down to 185, a lot of us thought that would be the perfect weight class for him. The guy could really show off his skill set and do some great things. But unfortunately for him, I mean, especially in that Philippou fight, his plans kind of got derailed there. He was competitive in a few fights before that as well. But, Larkin showed some signs of, weakness, and he was the fierce striker, I guess, from his Strikeforce days or whatnot in all of our minds. I mean, he has a quality win even over Robbie Lawler, the current UFC welterweight champion. So he's impressive. He's got the skill set to do damage on the feet. He's the type of guy that put in a ton of work and has gotten his takedown defense to the point where it's not easy to take the guy down. He sprawls and brawls well. And he does some really good things, but unfortunately for him, it just hasn't worked out. He's been on this incredible losing skid, so he's dropping down to 170 to try to kind of regain some of the momentum he had before, but he's fighting a very tough guy in Howard, and Howard is a complete overall fighter. I mean, the guy's definitely solid in all aspects of the game as well. He's a veteran that's been around for a long time, his second stint in the UFC, and he's fared fairly well. I mean, his last fight against Ebersol, he was in the position to win it, I believe. He just didn't push enough to get the nod. I mean, it was a close, controversial type of split decision. But in a way, a lot of people believe he won, but it was his fault because I think he just didn't do enough to make it clear, that he should have got the nod there. So that was a little bit setback in my mind because even in his loss against LaFleur, I think he showed a lot of good things. In that loss, that he made it a lot closer than people thought it would be. And again, Howard showed his complete game in that fight. He's got wrestling, he's got good Muay Thai skill, he's got a little bit of power to go along with it. So he's a hard out for many. But this fight here, it's kind of a tricky one for me because again, Howard's the better grinder. Larkin's making his debut at 170. So really all depends on how Larkin looks, I think, at 170 and how well the weight cut goes for him. Because this is I think his last chance to stay in the UFC and keep his job is getting the W here against Howard. So a lot riding on the line for Larkin in this fight. Hopefully the weight cut goes well for him. Skill set for skill set, I think is pretty close. I do think that Larkin's a little bit faster. He's a little bit more of the verse striker. He has more tools, that he can throw at you, and I think he can outpoint Howard, honestly. So I'm gonna slightly lean with Larkin.
And I'm gonna agree. The main reason here is that John Howard just doesn't do enough in fights, and especially recently, he just hasn't been able to pull the trigger. And that actually has been a criticism of Lorenz Larkin in the past as well. But I think now that he's finally dropping to welterweight, this is a guy that debuted in Strikeforce at light heavyweight and looked good. He beat Gian Vellante. He beat some good fighters at light heavyweight. And now he's all the way down to 170, which is where I think he finally belongs. This is where his body size actually matches up against people and he's not going to be outsized. And you got to remember, this is a guy that beat Robbie Lawler convincingly in Strikeforce when he first dropped down to middleweight. So and now he's dropping down to welterweight where he has a win over the current champ. I mean, this guy has all the talent and potential in the world. He just needs to use it. Obviously, his biggest weaknesses are getting pressured against the fence and occasionally getting taken down. And his chin is not the best either, so he has to be careful protecting that. But against John Howard, he should be in a decent position. If he can stay in open space, Lorenz Larkin throws a lot of kicks. His punching accuracy is pretty good. He doesn't have the most power in the world. Obviously, he hasn't finished a lot of fights recently, so Howard won't be that worried about that. But in open space, Lorenz Larkin's very dangerous. He's flashy. He can pull out a lot of tricks. And John Howard needs to grind this fight to a halt. He needs to make it ugly. He needs to push Larkin against the fence. He needs to work for takedowns. He needs to constantly pressure him and just make him uncomfortable, make him fight off of his heels. And I don't think he's going to be able to do that. Larkin should be able to get enough going when they're at distance, and he should be able to dish out enough punishment even when they are up close and personal. So I'm going to side with Lorenz Larkin here, but you got to be a little careful just because you never know exactly how a fighter is going to look when they're first fighting at a new weight class. But my pick is going to be Lorenz Larkin. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, I think they agree that this is very, very close, and also there's some unknowns here because of the weight class shifts. Lorenz Larkin, we know, is a gifted striker. He loves the long range attack. He has a very diverse arsenal. He uses a lot of leg kicks, a lot of body kicks. John Howard actually does too. So he also mixes up his game, but I don't think just in pure talent and skill that he's quite as flashy a striker as Lorenz Larkin is. And Howard has also had trouble keeping up pace. So although the numbers are close and they're back and forth here, overall, I think I give Larkin the advantage if they're standing at a distance. The problem is that John Howard has before made fights, a grinder, up close and dirty, clinching a lot, taking it to the ground kind of game plan. And if he does that here, he could certainly get a decision and grind out Lorenz Larkin. The big stat that I'm looking at here, ground control time, on average, it should be 50% of your time spent on the ground is in a position of control versus your opponent being in control 50% of the time. John Howard is right about average. Lorenz Larkin is only in control 8% of the time. So basically he's on his back 92% of the time when he spends his time on the mat. That's a huge weakness. You can't face a guy who's a decent wrestler with that kind of hole in your game. You're going to spend the whole fight trying to avoid takedowns. So if Larkin is able to keep it standing, and actually his takedown defense is pretty good. I think he knows that people are coming after him, for that reason. Now both these guys with a reach of just 72 inches, both of them are very short for the even welterweight division actually. At middleweight, Larkin was just outgunned, outsized, outranged, and being a ranged striker, he just couldn't close that distance. He couldn't, stay off his back and pick people apart the way he should. So now at welterweight, we'll see how the weight cut goes, but he should be a lot better equipped to handle his opponent given that they have essentially the same range. And Larkin is quite a bit younger. So, I also am slightly leaning Lorenz Larkin, but I do see a clear path to victory for John Howard should he be able to get up close and grind this out. But I don't think he can stand a trade with Larkin. So, I think the odds are close for a reason. I too am having trouble, leaning one way or the other. I could see either guy winning this, but ever so slight lean to Larkin, even though it's pretty even on paper.
Now sticking with the welterweight division, we have Cathal Pendred, who is 15-3-1, taking on Sean Spencer, who's 12-3. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
I opened Spencer minus 140, the comeback on Pendred, even money, and right now it's minus 160 for Spencer. The comeback on Pendred is plus 140. So more support coming in early on Spencer. Now the line did escalate to close to 2-1 if I'm not mistaken. Now it's bounced back down some. So there has been two-way action, two-way support on this fight overall. So the sportsbooks are a lot closer than the line movement probably indicates here in this spot, which is kind of good. I'm glad they're getting some Pendred action back because I do lean a little bit more towards Spencer in this spot. And the reason being, I mean, he's just simply the better fighter. I have a ton of respect for Pendred. I mean, the guy is one of those fighters that has a ton of heart, tough as nails, continues to improve, fight by fight for sure. But unfortunately for him, I guess it doesn't, like, nothing in his game stands out too much to the point where he can dominate a fight. That's why he's got a lot of close, controversial type of decisions. And I think it's probably going to be another one here. Spencer, I think, is the better, more versed striker on the feet. He can mix things up better. He's going to have some speed advantage there. I think he's got better defense on the feet as well. He's got decent takedown defense. So Pendred's going to struggle in this fight because he's going to look to push the pace, look to maybe pin Spencer up against the cage, look for some takedowns there and try to grind him out. Now, he could have a little bit of success. Spencer's definitely going to have to be keen to all of that. And I think he will be. And I think that Spencer has an outside shot landing enough damage on the feet that he could possibly rock Pendred and be the first one. I shouldn't say first because he has a KO loss on his resume, but be the first one in the UFC at least to finish the job against a guy like Pendred. Now, Spencer's not known for his knockout power, but he has shown flashes of potential with KO power as well. And the way he mixes things up, he's a pretty accurate striker as well. So there's a lot of good things about Spencer to like in this fight, but if the fight does hit the scorecards, this is what worries me a little bit. I mean, Pendred is that type of just, never gives up, relentless type of fighter that he makes things interesting on the scorecards and he makes judges kind of scratch their head and makes the fight closer than it really should be. And that's a lot of credit. You got to credit the guy for doing that. He's just your true type of grinder. Now, he does have some KOs on his resume, but I don't think he's much of a threat in this fight as far as knocking Spencer out. Spencer's been in there. I mean, he has been rocked and he's been in there with some good fighters. I mean, that Garcia fight was just tremendous back and forth. But I don't think Pendred could do that sort of thing to him. So I think the way for victory, the path for victory for Pendred is actually grinding him out and winning another close competitive decision, whereas Spencer can also win by decision and maybe even get that finish. So a slight lean towards Spencer. If it hits the scorecards, it's going to be one of those fights that I think a lot of people are going to be unsure of who gets the nod, even if most of us do lean towards Spencer, getting the nod there as well. So dangerous fight for betting, but for me, honestly, I think you got to side with Spencer. He is the better fighter at this stage. He's got more ways to win the fight, so I'm going to go that way.
Yeah, Cathal Pendred, he's been one of the most frustrating fighters to bet against in recent memory. Like, honestly, I just don't think the guy is that good of an overall fighter. He doesn't have a very good chin. He doesn't have much power. He's not the most technical on the feet. His wrestling's okay. His ground game is okay. Like, there's really not a lot to like in him. So, of course, we're going to bet against him. And his UFC debut, he gets absolutely flattened by Mike King, but King just couldn't quite finish him, and then gassed himself out. Pendred ends up turning the tides, and then wins the fight. Then the next fight, Umalatov. Umalatov drops him. Umalatov outworks him over the course of 3 rounds. It's close. Pendred makes it interesting by grinding it and slowing it down and making it ugly. And somehow Pendred gets a controversial decision. So it's been super, super frustrating to bet against this guy. And now we've got Sean Spencer. And while Spencer is the better fighter, in my opinion, it's not like a complete landslide. Spencer does a good job. He's a good point fighter, mostly on the feet. He has a decently high volume. He can win fights just from outworking his opponents. He doesn't really have a great ground game. So I'm not quite convinced that this will just be, a walk in the park for him. Pendred can make this fight ugly. He can grind it to a halt. He can push Spencer against the cage. He can potentially get takedowns. His offensive wrestling isn't atrocious. It's better than Spencer's. So he could win this fight again. So that would be super frustrating, at least for me. But and he does have a little bit of a size advantage against Spencer. So he's got a little bit of things going for him. Now, Spencer, I think his footwork's going to be better. Spencer should be able to move around on the outside and land. His defense is better. His chin is better. Spencer isn't the most powerful guy. He's not going to be knocking people out all over the place, but Pendred's chin is bad enough that if Spencer connects with something solid, he could put him away or at least really hurt him, because Pendred has been hurt in both of his UFC fights and on The Ultimate Fighter. So the potential is definitely there for Spencer to get that big TKO victory he's been searching for in his UFC career. So I'm going to pick Spencer. I think on the feet he does enough to win this fight, but there's just something about Cathal Pendred that he just wins fights he shouldn't win. So he's able to go out there and do it, and it's a little scary to pick against him. and it's frustrating. So I'm picking Spencer, but cautiously. Now, kicking off the main card and dropping down to the lightweight division, we have Norman Parke, who is 21-2-1 overall, taking on veteran Gleison Tibau, who is 39-10. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
Some decent movement for the dog. I opened Tibau minus 210, the comeback on Parke plus 160. I was surprised the amount of respect Parke got. I honestly figured that most of the betting public out there would probably think that Tibau is going to be too much for Parke, and he's not really ready to take that step up in competition, because Tibau has been towards the top of the lightweight division, as we all know, for a long time. I mean, just on the brink of title contention. He's now more of kind of in the gatekeeper type of role, but he's a tough gatekeeper because he's the type of guy that has, I think, arguably some of the best wrestling at 155. Great takedown defense Tibau has. He's just a great grinder, and he's improved, and he's got more confidence with time in the UFC, especially with all the people that he's fought. He's improved his stand-up game, and he's got a little bit of power to go along with it. So Tibau is a very, very good fighter, and it is a big step up for competition for Parke. I mean, this is by far the best fighter he's ever faced. So surprised at the early action. Right now it's Tibau minus 140. The comeback on Parke is plus 120. But there is a decent amount of two-way action coming into the sportsbook. So Tibau has been getting some love back. So it's probably not as drastic as people think as far as people picking both guys. It's evened out a lot, since the line's been out, and the line has been out for a little while. So that being said, it's a kind of a tough one to call because, I mean, I think the UFC's making this matchup for Parke to pick off and get a solid win over a very respected veteran in Tibau. And I think it's very possible because the bad thing about Tibau sometimes is he does fight to the level of his competition. I mean, he has a lot of close decisions. If the fight hits the scorecards, he's involved in those kind of controversial, close, squeak by type of fights that, he ends up getting the nod more times than not. But he kind of keeps people in the fight because he tends to be a little bit inactive at times. He tends to not utilize his wrestling skill. And so his fight IQ, even though he's an excellent fighter and he's been around for a long time and he performs well in most cases, his fight IQ at times, I think, lets him down. I think if he was a little bit more aggressive, and of course, I mean, that has to do with a little bit of the cardio because in the past, Tibau's been known to slow down in the second and third round and let fighters kind of back into that. So he's addressed those issues from time to time. It looks like he's kind of had some better weight cuts and cardio hasn't been an issue as much, especially recently. I mean, I think he's addressed it a little bit, but still, you don't know which Tibau you're going to get. So that raises a lot of question marks in my mind. And for Parke, I mean, Parke has now been facing some better competition throughout his career for sure. I mean, the guy has a very talented skill set. He's been training at Alliance MMA and he's gotten much better, I think, being around that environment and kind of absorbing from the coaches and the skilled athletes that are around him as well. So his confidence is at an all-time high. He keeps improving from fight to fight for sure. He had a pretty impressive performance over Catania in his last fight. And the guy, so every fight that he shows up, you can see that he's improving. You can see that his hands are getting a little bit better. He's developing a little bit more power. So he's becoming slightly a threat on the feet. And again, going back to the takedown game, his takedown defense overall has been pretty solid. I look back at the Santos fight, and you know what? Leonardo Santos probably doesn't get as much respect as he deserves, I think, in the grappling and takedown department. And Parke fared fairly well in that fight. I mean, he did decent fending off a lot of his takedowns, and I think he's going to keep on improving from that. So Parke's takedown game overall, or his takedown defense, I should say, is pretty respectable. And I think he's a little bit busier on the feet. His hands are a little bit better. Tibau has a little bit more pure power. He's able, I think, to rock and do a little bit more damage. But defensively, I think Parke has a little bit better defense. And I think his boxing's a little bit ahead of Tibau's at this point too. And again, he keeps on getting better. So if the fight stays standing, I almost give the slight lean to Parke. I think it's going to be very competitive. It'll go back and forth. But I think the difference is going to be Parke's hands. His boxing is going to be a little bit better than Tibau's. He's going to be able to land a little bit more. He stays a little bit more active. But he has to keep from getting pushed up against the cage controlled. Tibau's probably going to look for some takedowns throughout the fight as well. So Parke has to be cautious for that. And that could win Tibau the fight. I mean, just keeping things close and kind of controlling the pace and the action and where the fight takes place. So it's a tough fight. For me, I've been going back and forth. It's another very tricky pick-em type of fight in my opinion. But I'm going to go with the young blood. I'm going to go with Parke.
No, I'm going to have to disagree. The main reason here is you look at the people that beat Gleison Tibau, and it's the Khabib Nurmagomedov, it's Michael Johnson, it's, Jim Miller, split decision against Melvin Gillard. Those type of guys that were really top lightweights at one point. He's the classic gatekeeper, and he's been able to go out there and get quality wins, and he's actually looked pretty good. He's been shoring up some of his faults recently. He's been doing a lot of things right, and I can't even say that Norman Parke is the young blood here, because Tibau's only 3 years older than him. It's 31-28. Yeah, Tibau's got a lot more wear and tear on him in terms of UFC fights in his career, but he hasn't taken that much damage in his career, honestly. I think he's been knocked out twice, once in his first UFC fight, and then once, a year and a half, ago. So, I'm not even that worried about that. Gleison Tibau is just the classic gatekeeper. He has a really solid wrestling base. He's decent enough on the feet to hold his own against most people, and he's just incredibly big and powerful and strong and imposing. And it's no secret that he cuts the most weight out of anybody in the lightweight division to make the weight class. And I think that presents a lot of problem for people. You saw in the Pat Healy fight, in the Piotr Hallman fight, Tibau is able to get off to a good enough start that even though he starts to slow down a little bit in that third round, those guys just can't do enough to come back and win the fight. And I think that's going to happen here against Norman Parke. Tibau has improved his stand-up enough that he's going to basically go back and forth there with Parke a little bit. And they'll be relatively even. And all he has to do is mix in the wrestling, whether it's shoving Parke against the fence, whether it's taking him down and working some ground and pound or some submission attempts. All he's got to do is just mix that in, and I think he wins decision here. I don't think Parke has enough power to go out there and finish Gleison Tibau. And you look at the people that Parke's been fighting. I mean, yeah, you go, oh man, this guy's 4-0 and 1 in the UFC since he signed up. But you look at who he's been fighting: Colin Fletcher, Kazuki Tukadome, John Tuck, and Naoyuki Katani are his wins, and he had a draw against Leonardo Santos. There is not one quality win there. Like, basically, they have been really slowly, and I mean slowly, building this guy up. And this is a huge jump up in competition for him against Gleison Tibau. Tibau is a guy that's a fringe top 15. He's very, very difficult to deal with, and I just don't think he passes this test. He's just not on that level. So I'm going to go with Tibau. I think he wins a decision here, and I'm pretty confident about it. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, I think the numbers agree with the main points that you're making, and that is that Tibau's wrestling is very solid. He has landed more takedowns in his career in the UFC than any other fighter that's active. I think GSP would be at the top of that list if he was still active, but that's 80 takedowns he's landed. Takedown defense, he's also on that list. He's tied in 4th place, 92% takedown defense. So when it comes to determining if this goes to the ground, he is perfectly skilled to do that. If he wants to do that, I think that's the difference in this fight. And Norman Parke, on the other hand, his striking metrics are superior. However, as Brian pointed out, the competition is definitely different. Norman Parke's numbers do look good. He maintains a much higher pace than Tibau, and he's more accurate, and he hasn't been dropped. Tibau's been dropped 3 times now. But big difference in competition there. If they choose to stand and trade, it's a toss-up to me. I wouldn't feel comfortable predicting who's going to do better. They're both southpaws. They have similar range. Who knows? But it's on the mat that this appears to be a mismatch. I know Parke has a judo background, maybe even some wrestling, but I just don't think it's at the level of Tibau in terms of controlling the mat game for the first 2 rounds, and that's what he needs to do. So I do see that Parke could be the lighter, faster guy on the feet, and that could pose some problems. But he has to keep the fight there. And I'm not sure if he can do that. So I am slightly leading towards Tibau. I don't feel like I have a good handle on Parke, because of his competition. This is definitely the type of fight where we're going to learn a lot more about Norman Parke and how good he really is in each position. We're going to see some stand up. We're going to see if he can stay off his back and how he performs there. So we're going to learn a lot here about Norman Parke, but until then, I don't feel very confident either picking for or against him. The numbers have a slight lean towards Tibau. And again, he has certainly faced the stiffer competition and has performed very well, especially in the wrestling category. So, the numbers do kind of like Tibau for a decision. But that's definitely not a high confident pick.
Now this brings us to a rather unique situation. We have a middleweight contest between Uriah Hall, who is 10-4, taking on extremely late replacement fighter Ronald Stallings, who is 12-6. Now the lines for this fight have not been released yet. The bout was just agreed to earlier today. So Nick, tell us a little bit about your MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one in advance of the line coming out.
Well, still going to finalize everything as far as the actual official line goes. But, I mean, again, Stallings is one of these guys that you got to give him credit for making his UFC debut on a week's notice or so. He wants to get into UFC, and it's impressive to see that, no doubt about it, because I think that he's one of these fighters that kind of deserved a shot a while back. I know that a lot of people might not know about him. I mean, if you look back at his Strikeforce career, he lost to, well, I think he only had one fight in there, but he lost to Amagov in that fight. But it was a competitive split decision type of fight. Nothing to kind of, I guess be too negative for him in that aspect of it. And then Mike Macenzio, he's got a former UFC vet on his resume as well, and he's got a nasty knee to the body KO against Macenzio too, which was very impressive. So he's a type of fighter that's been in there against solid competition throughout his career. He's fought on a lot of kind of those mid-level shows, but against as much, I guess, as good as you can get competition level on that stage. But he is taking a big step up here in competition going against Uriah Hall. And of course being on short notice as well. That doesn't really fare too well for him. And what you're getting with Stallings is, I mean, he's a pretty complete fighter. He can beat you on the feet. He can beat you on the ground as well. But he's just, again, one of those guys that isn't really dominant in any particular area. And with Hall, I think that he's finally starting to come into his own. I mean, I know that, I think that Hall, I mean, he was a 5-1 favorite in that fight. He's going to enter around the same mark here against, Stallings. I mean, Taylor's a different matchup stylistically for him, but I think Stallings is another winnable fight for him. And Hall has all the potential in the world to actually make some waves and potentially get a UFC title shot at 185 if he keeps on going down the right track. And he gets, again, Adam mentioned stuff about his mental issues. At times he has some mental lapses, and I do believe that that's fairly accurate with Hall, because I mean he's got the skill set on the feet. He's very dangerous. He's got the technical advantage over most fighters. He mixes things up well. He's got knockout power to go along with it. I mean, what he did on the Ultimate Fighter show, I mean, that's why Dana White was calling him, arguably the next Anderson Silva, because I mean he looked that impressive on the show for sure. He was finishing people. We haven't seen that side of him yet, in the UFC. And I think that's going to come with time as he gets a little bit more comfortable. And again, you see that progression in his game, with his W over Lehman, with his W over Santos as of late as well. So I think we're going to see probably the best version of Hall we've seen to date. And it's a winnable fight against Stallings. So you're going to see, again, off the top of my head, it's not going to be the official confirmed line, but it's going to be around 6-1 again for Hall, I'm sure. And it might get bet up, and I wouldn't be surprised, after that as well. Now Stallings, I think in many ways is actually a tougher matchup than, Taylor was for Hall in this spot. But again, you got to factor in the short notice, impact of the fight and stylistically how they match up. And Hall's the better striker here. Hall's a stronger fighter. He should be able to control things in the clinch, even though, again, I mean, you got to watch out for Stallings' clinch game because his knees are pretty brutal in the clinch as well. But I think Hall's a better wrestler here. He just has more ways to win this fight across the board, and he should realistically win this fight. I know the UFC is kind of they have faith in Hall. That's why they're matching him up the way they are, and they think that he can definitely make an impact in the middleweight division. So let's see it happen. I think Hall definitely has that kind of potential, and if he lives up to it, I'm not that sure. But it's hard not to pick Hall in this spot. So unless Stallings comes in super great shape, which I doubt, I mean, it's hard to do it in 1 week's notice and just surprise us all with some kind of KO victory, I think it's Hall's fight to win or lose.
And I'm in complete agreement. This is definitely Uriah Hall's fight to lose. Ronald Stallings is getting this opportunity 100% because the UFC absolutely needed somebody to step in on short notice. They were desperate. He's not even coming into the UFC off of a win. His last fight was this past November. He lost a 5-round decision to Tim Williams. So I guess Tim Williams wasn't available to fight or didn't want to take the fight on a week's notice. So that's how Stallings got it. Now Stallings isn't a bad fighter. This guy's got Strikeforce experience. He competed in there against Adlan Amagov. And he was competitive as Amagov started to slow in the later rounds. The big thing here is open space. Uriah Hall at open space is lethal. He has those incredible, basically video game combo type ability to just throw out any type of attack and finish you with it from distance. Up close, it's going to be a little more interesting because that's where Stallings is at his best. If Uriah Hall wants to stay in the pocket and get cute, he might eat a knee for his trouble, get in some trouble there. And on the ground, that's probably where Stallings does most of his damage, is he can get in top position. He has some pretty good ground and pound, decent elbows, and some overall pretty good submission ability, training out of Team Lloyd Irvin. So it's interesting, but I don't expect Uriah Hall to play into Ronald Stallings' strengths here, because if Stallings can't get the fight up close, then he's not going to win. At distance, he's a bit of a fish out of the water. He has some power, but he does not have the technique behind it. Basically, he needs to get this fight to the clinch, because in the clinch, his knees are lethal. Like, that's how he finished the fight against Vicenzio. He's done a lot of damage with knees in the clinch in several of his fights, pretty much all of his wins. So it'll be very interesting to see if Hall is able to avoid letting Stallings get up and inside. So I expect him to. Hall is good enough and smart enough to not make that type of mistake. And worst case scenario, I think Hall should just win by outpointing, but he could definitely get a finish here. And especially on short notice, you really aren't quite sure what Stallings' conditioning is going to be. And as much as people talk about the mental lapses that Uriah Hall makes in fights, he did show a ton of heart in his last fight, where he had that brutal toe injury, and he just fought through it and was able to win a decision. So I'm going to give him a little bit of credit there. He's definitely improving in that department. Now this takes us to the co-main event of the evening, a lightweight contest, a trilogy match between Donald Cowboy Cerrone, stepping in on short notice with a 26-6 record with 1 no contest, taking on former lightweight champion Benson Henderson, who is 21-4. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
I opened the line exactly, pick -120 either way, and the line has since been up. Well, it's been bet all over the place, actually. Cerrone was a slight favorite at one point, and right now, and more steady, has been Henderson at -150. The comeback on Cerrone's +130. So a little bit more action coming in on Bendo's way. And I understand, Ben Henderson has been, obviously he's been the lightweight champion before. He's faced some tremendous competition. Both these guys have for sure as well. And Henderson owns 2 victories over Cerrone in the past, dating back to their WEC days. So a lot of advantages seem to be leaning towards Henderson. And the fact that Cerrone's taking this fight on such short notice, which a lot of people are going to point out, I can understand that as well. Even though Cerrone had an impressive performance a few weeks back against Jury, and to me, in my opinion, and I was on Jury, most of you guys know that as well, I thought Jury was going to perform a little bit better and give Cerrone a better challenge than what ended up taking place here. But to me, looking back at that fight, it was almost a glorified sparring match. Cerrone really had his way with Jury. Jury didn't pose much of a threat at all during that fight. Cerrone was fresh at the end of the fight. He didn't really take all that much damage at all. And Cerrone was back in the UFC offices, as we all know again, ready for his next fight. And this is the fight they gave him. So to me, Cerrone, this is basically an extension of his training camp, even though, there's some flags there for sure, question marks or whatever you could say around it. So it's not the typical short notice situation for sure. And if you look at the recent competition levels for both these guys, Ben Henderson, it's unfair really to say that he's on a bit of a decline, but he could very well be. He got knocked out. Of course, he got caught by RDA, in his last fight. That's why RDA is in the title fight against Perez as we speak. Against Habalov, he was actually struggling in that fight early on, but he did what he had to do. He came back and he looked impressive in that fight. Arguably against Thompson, a lot of people thought that Josh Thompson won that fight. And before that, he had a very close competitive decision against Gilbert Melendez. And of course, he got, finished by Pettis too along the way. So if you look back at his performances, he hasn't been to the peak of his career. I think so. Even though it is a little bit unfair to say maybe he's on a decline, there's definitely some signs indicating that it's possible. Now, on the other hand, Cerrone, if you look back at some of his past performances, I mean, we all know that he had, he's got 5 victories in a row in the UFC, and they've been within a year span, if I'm not mistaken. So that's impressive. Not a lot of fighters have accomplished that. And the skill level and the competition that he's faced, I mean, Jury, Alvarez, Miller, Barboza, even Martins, which is a very underrated lightweight. He's fought some really good fighters, and he's looked great in all of those fights. So, Cerrone, in my opinion, his biggest flaw is he eats too much punishment. I mean, he absorbs too many punches, and his defense could definitely tighten up a little bit. He's a tough guy, hard to knock out, but I think that's his flaw. And I'm not sure Ben Henderson is going to be the guy to kind of take advantage of that. Ben Henderson's striking has improved throughout the years for sure. He's definitely more of a KO threat, but as far as striking matchups go, Cerrone's definitely the better striker overall in this case. And I think that Cerrone's takedown defense and his ability to keep the fight upright and really kind of learn, and with the competition level that he's faced, to stay off his back as much as possible and to make it a fight. I think that Cerrone's going to actually fare pretty well in this fight. I don't think Henderson's going to control the wrestling aspect as much as people probably think out there. And if that's the case, I think Cerrone's going to have his moments on the feet. He's going to be the one that's a little bit more effective in doing, better things on the feet standing as well. So it's a tough fight. I mean, in my opinion, it truly is a pick'em type of fight. It could go either way. I don't think we're going to see what happened in the last fight. Henderson caught him, in a fairly quick submission there. I don't think Cerrone's going to get caught in something like that again. So I think it's going to be another war. And I do think momentum's a little bit more on Cerrone's side. I think there is those question marks that I just pointed out about Ben Henderson and his last few performances, even though you got to respect what he's accomplished. It just doesn't sit right with me. So I'm going to go against the grain here and pick Cerrone, because I do think that Cerrone, his striking is at a better level right now than Henderson. And I think this fight does end up playing out more so on the feet than it does on the ground. And if that's the case, you got to kind of side with him a little bit. Again, basically a toss-up fight, but I'm going to slightly lean towards Cerrone. I think he's going to continue this incredible streak that he's on. And I can't believe that I'm saying that, because, I mean, again, given the level of competition, the guys that he's faced, it's pretty tremendous. And if he adds Henderson to that list, man, I mean, the guy definitely is worthy of getting that title shot next. So my pick is going to be officially Donald Cerrone in this fight.
And you have to give a ton of respect to Donald Cerrone. The guy had already fought 5 times in a year, and he takes a fight on 15 days notice. I mean, it's insane. And it's against somebody that's beat him twice before. And what's crazy is I'm actually in agreement with you on that he has a really good chance to win this fight. Benson Henderson just has not looked that great lately. And Donald Cerrone is fighting right now better than he's ever fought in his entire career. His striking is on point. His submissions are at an absolute all-time high. I mean, the transitions that he had against Miles Jury in his last fight were unbelievable. Completely took Jury's head out of the game in the first 30 seconds of the fight when he transitioned to that omoplata immediately off a takedown. So the guy is just doing everything right now. His kicks are fantastic. His punching power is stronger than ever before. There's nobody like Donald Cerrone. There's nobody in the world that can take fights on short notice and live the lifestyle he lives and fight so often and have the success that he's having. It's a phenomenon, and it's crazy to watch. Now, in terms of a pure breakdown, you look at the 2 fights that they had before, you almost have to toss them out the window. The first time they fought was an insane back and forth battle of Benson Henderson's wrestling against Cerrone's striking. Henderson isn't just a pure wrestler anymore. Like, that fight is completely out the window. He can stand and trade with people a little bit. And, that's how he was able to win all those crazy close decisions. And the second fight was Benson Henderson getting a really quick guillotine choke and just ending it right away. That's out the window, in my opinion. Donald Cerrone's not getting tapped by anybody. Like, his submission game is so much better now. So you throw that one out the window. I know it's crazy to say that, that they fought twice, that you should be looking back at those fights. Those aren't the most important fights. What's important is what they've done for us lately. And lately, Donald Cerrone has been not just winning, but beating some of the best guys, and Barboza and Jury and Jim Miller and Martins. It's been crazy watching this resurgence after a lot of people were basically giving up on him when he lost to Nate Diaz and Anthony Pettis. This resurgence is just incredible. Now, Benson Henderson, some of the things that he does really well that actually help him win those crazy close controversial decisions is his no-selling. When people hit him with strikes, they hit him to the body, they hit him to the legs, they land headshots, he acts like nothing happened. Like, he just has this incredible ability to just take the strike and just keep moving forward and like nothing hit him at all. And that's convincing for judges. It's convincing for people watching. And Donald Cerrone needs to really, if he's going to land on Benson Henderson, he needs to make it count. And as you saw in the Rafael Dos Anjos fight, you can hurt Benson Henderson. He's been dropped in the past. He got obviously knocked down by Anthony Pettis in the 5th round of their first fight. He got hurt to the body by Pettis the second time around. He got dropped by and rocked by Jim Miller when they fought. So, his chin is not as great as a lot of people give him credit for. And then obviously Dos Anjos put him away in his last fight. So the potential is there for Donald Cerrone to win this fight by knockout. I don't see Cerrone submitting him as much as his submission game has improved, but I can see Donald Cerrone outstriking Benson Henderson. I can see Donald Cerrone potentially knocking him out, or I can see Benson Henderson turning this fight into just an ugly, ugly grind fest and trying to win another close decision. I don't see Benson Henderson getting a finish here, even though Cerrone's taking the fight on crazy short notice. I don't think the short notice is even going to be that big of a deal because Cerrone didn't take any damage against Miles Jury. So the way I'm looking at it is I think Donald Cerrone has more ways to win, and I think Donald Cerrone is going to win. So I'm going with the underdog. I'm picking Cowboy. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, this is another super close matchup, and we do have the benefit of some historical data on both these guys. That first fight, I think, is a preview of what we should see. Donald Cerrone has the more dangerous stand-up game. He has a reach advantage over Henderson. He is far more powerful and dangerous, especially with his kicks. Even though they have similar styles in terms of mixing up their target selection, Donald Cerrone definitely is more dangerous. I mean, he has 13 knockdowns in his WEC and UFC career. That's ridiculous. Henderson has scored 4. He's also been dropped 4 times. So on the feet, Henderson's stand-up game is becoming slowly a little bit more of a liability. We saw him get dropped in a recent fight and put away. And he has to be careful. That's going to be weighing on him. He hates to lose. It affects him profoundly. You could see it in his post-fight interview. So you throw a guy like Cerrone at him, who is willing to eat some punches. His, as Nick pointed out, his defense, his striking defense to the head is not very good. But that doesn't matter because he is so dangerous with his striking. He is normally going to eat a couple and he is going to put you away. So I don't know if Benson Henderson wants to go toe to toe with a guy like Donald Cerrone. In their first fight, on the feet, it was the last 2 rounds where Cerrone dominated and won the last 2 rounds out of 5. The first 3 rounds, it was Henderson wrestling all day long. Cerrone was trying to go for submissions on the ground, but it wasn't doing him any favors. It wasn't winning him those rounds. You can't fight off your back the whole time. If Henderson is smart, that's what he's going to try to do again here. Grind Cerrone down early. Maybe the short turnaround will affect Cerrone's cardio, but this is only 3 rounds, so maybe not. I just think Henderson, his wrestling is quite strong. He's big for the division. He carries a lot of muscle. Strong guy. He can throw people around. That's what he wants to do against Cerrone. Just the exact same way he did in the first fight. Can he do it? I don't know. This is one of those coin flip fights for me, especially because it really depends on where the fight plays out, on the feet or on the ground. I do see paths to victory for Cerrone. I do think it's possible he actually wins inside the distance with the knockout. But the longer this fight goes, especially if there's a lot of clinching, and that's another area where Benson Henderson excels. He spends a lot of time in the clinch, and he is usually in control of that time, where Donald Cerrone is not. So if the fight is up close and personal like that, Henderson's control might win these rounds. But he is definitely susceptible. So this is a tough fight for me to call and to pick a winner. I will say that I think the odds are about accurate. I mean, I do think that it should stay very, very close. Neither man should be a significant favorite over the other. It doesn't matter if Henderson already has 2 wins over Cerrone in the past. He is even more vulnerable now than he was back then. So, this one's in the air for me. I could go either way. If forced to pick, I would lean slightly for Henderson to grind out a wrestling victory. But that's assuming that he's smart enough to do that and can do that against Cerrone, given how aggressive he is.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Reed. Now this takes us to the main event of the evening. We have a featherweight contest between the notorious Conor McGregor, who is 16-2, taking on veteran Dennis Siver, who is 22-9 with 1 no contest. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
McGregor opens -600. The comeback on Siver +400, and right now line is -1200 for McGregor. Comeback on Siver is +775. Wow. I mean, at the same time, not even that shocked because McGregor has all that hype around him. I mean, he's performed relatively well. And especially, since making his UFC debut. So the hype seems to be justified around him. The guy's an animal on the feet. He's got decent takedown defense to go along with it. He talks a lot of smack, but you got to give the guy credit because he's been able to back it up. There's no doubt about that. So a lot of people want to see McGregor versus Jose Aldo. The UFC obviously wants to see that as well. That's why I think they're banking on McGregor getting the W over a declining Siver in this fight. I have to agree with him. It's hard to argue all the early action coming in on McGregor, and it's hard to argue with the UFC's matchmaking here. I mean, Siver's a very respectable fighter at 145. I mean, he was right there at the brink of getting a title shot as well. He's a very complete fighter. I mean, even though Siver's more known for his stand-up game, I guess, I think one of his best attributes is actually getting the fight to the floor and working his wrestling and ground and pound game. Has some subs to go along with that for sure as well, but still, so Siver has developed into a complete MMA fighter, and he's made a pretty good run overall in his UFC career. Unfortunately for him, that, run's gonna come, it's gonna get a little bumpy here with, McGregor, because again, I think if Siver really can't take this fight to the ground, even though, he has some skill on the feet, McGregor's gonna probably knock him out and catch him. So I don't really think the fight goes past the first round, honestly. I think McGregor, I mean, all the smack he talks about finishing Siver in the first couple minutes, I think is very possible. And I think the UFC, again, realizes that as well. That's why they matched this fight. So, hard to say. I mean, if Siver can pull off the upset here, of course it's going to be tremendous for the sportsbook. So I'm going to be, honestly, siding with Siver as far as hoping he can pull off the miracle upset here. But it is going to be tough. And I mean, McGregor is in this spot for a reason. I think he is a very talented fighter. Although, let me just say this, I think he is still a little raw. He has to develop his overall ground game. If he faces a tremendous wrestler that is able to get the fight to the floor and cause him some problems, even with BJJ, I think that's where McGregor still lays a little bit untested. So I'm not sure if Siver's wrestling is going to be the answer here in this one, especially with Siver he's around 35 years old or so. So McGregor's a fresher, younger fighter. He's a motivated fighter. I'm sure Siver's going to come into this fight motivated as well with all the smack talk that McGregor has. But still, that being said, I mean, it's again hard basically to pick against McGregor in the spot. I mean, the guy has a tremendous amount of knockout power, and he probably does what he does best and knocks Siver out here as well. So my official pick, no shocker here, is going to be McGregor beating Siver, and probably inside the first round.
And I'm in agreement. The main thing here is age. And while I mentioned earlier that 3-year age gap wasn't the biggest deal in the world between Tibau and Parke, this time age is a huge factor because Dennis Siver's 35 compared to McGregor's 26. 9 years is huge, especially in the featherweight division where you need that youthful speed and explosiveness to be able to go out there and take care of business. And I just don't see Dennis Siver having that explosion and speed to keep up with Conor McGregor. You also factor in that Dennis Siver does not have a very good chin. He's been rocked and dropped and knocked out several times in his UFC career. And Conor McGregor might hit just as hard, if not harder, than any other opponent he's ever faced. So this is an incredibly scary proposition for him if he decides to stand and bang on the feet for any extended period of time. Honestly, the only way that Dennis Siver wins this fight is if he is shooting in for takedowns, working his ground game. His ground game is super underrated. He has an incredibly good top control, and his submission game is legit, and he is just very good at positioning and has strong hips. So if he gets you on the canvas, you can be in trouble. I mean, you saw in that last fight against Rosa where, you know, even when his opponent was shooting in for takedowns, he was sweeping him, he was getting top position, he was hunting for submissions. He is a very, very competent grappler. That's by far, I think, his most dangerous attribute. You know, a lot of people point to the spinning back kick and some of his stand-up ability, and he is a good striker. It's just, I don't think he's a good enough striker to hang one-on-one with Conor McGregor for an extended period of time without getting knocked out. Even if he lands that big spinning back kick, charging in, he could get knocked out. He just doesn't have that chin to stand and trade effectively, especially against somebody as accurate as Conor McGregor. You know, all it takes is one good shot that you don't see coming, and I think Dennis Siver is going to get knocked out. So, all in all, McGregor just has so many little intricacies to his stand-up game. It's going to be very difficult for Siver to really get anything going, in my opinion. His countering is fantastic. He does a lot of good subtle head movement. Now, this guy, you know, he's hyped up for a reason. He has a lot of talent on the feet, and I don't see Dennis Siver being the guy to stop the hype train. It's going to have to be a really good wrestler, or maybe the champion, Jose Aldo. My pick is going to be Conor McGregor, and I think he wins convincingly, probably in the first round. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, I think they're in full agreement. I mean, these are pretty extreme differences. And although the sample size on Conor McGregor is small, that's because he's finished guys very, very quickly. But keep in mind the quality of his opponents. Max Holloway, Brandao, those guys are not pushovers. Dustin Poirier was a shot away, fight away from a title shot. So I wouldn't even say that the 22 minutes I have on McGregor can't be informative. I think they are. He has been exceptional. He is extremely accurate striking and very, very powerful. He causes knockdowns at a very high rate for a featherweight. He also has very long reach for that division, facing a guy in Siver who does not. You mentioned the age differential, nearly 10 years age difference here, which I think is a big factor. Defense, McGregor is very hard to hit, and while Siver has been hard to hit, when he gets hit, he falls down. He's been dropped 6 times in his UFC career. He's lost by knockout several times or, been submitted after getting rocked. But on the other side, we see all check marks for McGregor because when he has used his wrestling, he was dominant. He used it against Max Holloway. It wasn't a lot. But again, Max Holloway is a very good fighter and opponent. So, this is pretty lopsided. And when you think about it, who would you put in with Conor McGregor to get him one more win in impressive fashion to get a title shot? You'd want to put him in against someone who is at least ranked, but who likes to strike, probably can't hang with McGregor, and has been knocked down or is easy to knock down. And that's what this profile looks like for Dennis Siver. He's no slouch. Obviously, I don't want to write him off here, but the numbers just are really lopsided in this instance. And so, while betting lines of, minus 1,000 or minus 1,200 are kind of crazy because a guy can always get injured in the first round, this is definitely a type of fight McGregor should win. And it's more of a question of when, and how, probably by strikes, but how fast can he do it? Is this a first round finish or is it not? I know the over under is set at 1.5, and I believe it's, nearly minus 200 for an early finish. And I do agree with that sentiment. I think McGregor is going to stalk him and he's going to drop him and he's going to finish him soon.
So that'll do it for our full event breakdown for UFC Fight Night 59. Part 2 of the Premium Oddscast featuring our premium bets will be out Saturday following the weigh-ins. So stay tuned for that if you're an MMAOddsbreaker.com premium member. And if you're not an MMAOddsbreaker.com premium member, you can sign up at our homepage. Just check out the top right corner. If we have a free play to give out, make sure to follow at MMAOB Premium on Twitter because that's where we'll post them first. We can also notify you of our free bets via email if you prefer that method. Just send an email to picks@MMAOddsbreaker.com and we'll add you to our free bet mailing list. Also, feel free to like our Premium Oddscast Facebook page. We post articles, show announcements, and plenty of other information there so you can stay up to date on everything from us if you're interested. Special thanks to our sponsor, 5 Dimes. Good luck, everyone, and hopefully the betting gods are on your side this week.